Well, hello everyone, and just wanted to say a few things about the Enneagram work that we're doing and what it's actually about, what it's for, and why it is helpful, what's useful about it. I think if people know about the Enneagram at all, if we've heard something about it, generally speaking, we've learned that it is a cool way to learn about the personalities of ourselves and of the important people in our lives, our friends, our family, our colleagues. And, at that kind of entry-level view, it can be very useful. It's certainly worthwhile to understand the personalities of my loved ones better. It can help a lot in marriages or work relationships. I think of all of those, the most important is self-understanding, and the more we kind of see a bit more about what makes us tick, it helps us occasionally pick something else, gives us more choice and more freedom. But that choice and freedom will really depend on our orientation toward what we learn when we hear about these different patterns of personality that we're calling types. So we have a few things that I always ask people to bear in mind when we're looking at this material. One of them is that we are not a type. You and I are not a type. We have a type in the sense that we have a way of relating to the world and of handling our emotions and of dealing with difficulties that is our bedrock, what we fall back on, what we trust. And, all things being equal, we tend to trust that modality. We have others available to us, but when we're more stressed or more focused, we'll tend to use certain ways of dealing with things more than others. And I think most of us can recognize that, and certainly we can see it in the people around us. We can see certain ways our friends and loved ones deal with things. So all of that is a good level of understanding. But then we get into a deeper work where we're trying to bring awakeness, presence, self-awareness to these patterns, which requires another level of understanding and another level of commitment. In this, we begin to really open up some of the freedom beyond our type pattern. Through that awareness, we get the choice of whether to go with that pattern or to pick something else. If we don't see the pattern, we become it, and much more than most of us realize. So this also works the other way around in that the more we become aware of the patterns, we become aware of what we tend to do instead of being awake and present in our life, how we tend to lose track of ourselves, what we get preoccupied with, if you will. So very valuable for any of us practicing meditation or centering or anything that we're doing in order to live a more awake life. So on that level, we can sort of get into the whole idea that maybe this is about finding out what we are beyond the personality, beyond the patterns, and we can start to touch some of the more transcendent places, the more non-dual states of consciousness that various spiritual and religious traditions address, or that we can find also through depth psychology, for example. And that's also wonderful. But what I'm going to be wanting us to really understand is that ultimately, at its deepest and most powerful level, at its greatest expression, the Enneagram is about the integration of that more expanded, non-dual, transpersonal view with our immediate lived humanity. It's bringing our most human, down-to-earth, practical, rootsy, instinctual, sometimes funky, sometimes tacky side of ourselves into union with, alignment with what we know ourselves to be beyond those patterns. And when the higher and the lower, if you will, or let's say the ascending and the descending come together, we start to experience what it means to be a whole human being, an integrated human being. We start to have an experience of what it really means to be a human being, which is way, way more interesting than the conventional views of what a person is. So we're really ultimately interested in, yes, learning about our personality, yes, finding out what we are beyond our personality, but ultimately bringing those two elements together into a kind of beautiful communion, a beautiful harmonized sensibility that is aware of what we're really here for, who we really are, who my friend really is, and at the same time with this liberated capacity to deal with the ins and outs and ups and downs of day-to-day life and the real kind of things that we are called upon to address. So when we're really looking at the Enneagram in that level, we're looking at the whole range of humanity, the whole sweep of it, which is pretty breathtaking if you think about it. So that's what we're up to, and that's what I think the main purpose of the Enneagram is, what it's here to help us with. Now, any system that we can work with as human beings, whether it's a psychological system or a philosophical system or a spiritual system, requires certain differentiations, definitions, distinctions. It has of necessity terminology, and the Enneagram is no exception. So there are terms that we use to refer to different elements of human experience. So generally speaking, what most of the Enneagram teachings that are in the world now share, if they're looking at this aspect of the different kinds of psychological patterns or types, we all use 4 terms: the passions, the fixations, the virtues, and the holy ideas. Now, like any other system, as I was just saying, if you don't know what those words mean, they can be a bit off-putting. But once you sort of understand what they're pointing to, they're very matter-of-fact and very human things. The passions are the core difficulty, emotional difficulty really, the core suffering that drives a lot of our human motivation. It's what we're trying to fix in ourselves, what we're always trying to address. And so the passions are our emotional reactivity, our unease, our suffering in various ways, and we talk about that and also about the kind of behavior that these particular forms of difficulty produce. So that's one term. The passions are transformed by presence into what we call the virtues. And the virtues are the beautiful, unself-conscious qualities of our purified heart. When we've really been doing our psychological and spiritual work, we become more human and more humane. We become more balanced. We're not so reactive. We don't get our buttons pushed as easily. And so there are ways that we show up in the world on the heart level when we are liberated to some degree from some of that suffering and some of that reactivity. And so the virtues are a way of talking about that. We look at 9 different flowerings of the heart, you might say. And that's what the virtues are. The fixations are a term we use to refer to habits of mind, habits of attention that we get stuck in. And we're so stuck in these patterns that we don't see them as such. We just think we're looking at reality. And probably the other people are just being ridiculous or dumb because they're not seeing it my way. I think most of us have felt that way at least sometimes. But our fixation is just based in certain assumptions about what I am, what reality is, a certain way of framing my experience that I don't realize I'm doing, and it's usually done in some sense to manage the suffering of the passion, the difficulty. The problem with that is it's a management that never actually lets the passion get healed. It just kind of postpones that date with our own heart. And we can live like that a long time, but the passion and fixation kind of work together to keep us in our usual kind of ego patterns. But the passion, just as the passion is transformed by presence and awareness and grace into the virtue, so too the fixations are transformed into and by what we call the holy ideas. Now that one's really a mouthful. Holy ideas sounds, again, a term that can be off-putting to some of us, but what it actually is referring to are different non-dual perceptions of reality, of self, of everything really, and how when we are able to relax enough to see the world from this other vantage point, from this non-dual consciousness that is part of everyone, it softens the fixation and liberates our minds so that we're actually able to think really outside of the box, to perceive things differently. And of course that opens things up so that the heart isn't stuck in the old patterns too. So when you hear all of this, of course we could take a lot of time talking about any one of those elements. But what gets interesting is seeing how we as human beings are in a constant dance of all these elements, how they're all working in different ways, moment by moment, and we're starting to be more awake and intelligent and kind about all of that, to really see with intelligence and mercy the goings-on in my own psyche. Only then, in a certain way, can I choose something different for myself. It tends to open the floodgates of kindness toward myself and others. And only then do I begin to actually be able to choose what really calls me, what calls me to service, what calls me to my true purpose. So while, of course, people can get caught up in the details of all of this, the idea or the sense is learning to recognize it so that we are awake to the patterns that are running in our consciousness, often without our recognizing them. And in the recognizing of them and recognizing them with kindness, all kinds of new potentials and possibilities open up for us. And I would add, for the world.